or is it something else at Radio V Islam? We're going to speak to our first guest for today. Nikolai Due-Gundersen is with us on the line. He is a MENA specialist and also joining us here on The Voice of Islam. Good afternoon. Peace be upon you. Welcome to the Drive Time Show, Nikolai.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's good to be back.
Politically speaking, why was it that the revolution didn't succeed as expected in the Middle East?
Well, I think that the Arab Spring, which some would argue is actually ongoing in some states, what it did was it got rid of leaders, but not necessarily the political systems behind those leaders. If we look at dictatorships, for example, even monarchies for that matter, usually there is a structural political system that they are in charge of, and you cannot necessarily just overthrow that system. You have structural issues, for example, in, let's say, Egypt, where it's really going quite downhill. And those socioeconomic issues that have stemmed from a welfare system that just is not affordable and from loans taken out that should not have been taken out didn't just go away because we got rid of Mubarak.
Yeah.
And I say this is, to me, this is one of the main reasons why it didn't succeed. The Arab Spring did not address those structural issues. You see.
And in your opinion, do you think it was the Iraq War that triggered the Arab Springs, or do you think it was something else?
Well, I think that if we look at the Iraq War and getting rid of Saddam Hussein, we actually are looking at a double-edged sword here, because you see, on the one hand, I do recall that when we saw Saddam Hussein overthrown, in a sense, it sent a message to the people of the Arab world that, okay, look, this can happen. You can get rid of a dictator.
Yeah.
At the same time, I think we should remember back then there are some dictators who took advantage of the Iraq War. That you had Bush saying, "Oh, there are weapons of mass destruction. We're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein." And I remember that people like Gaddafi, for example, they then came forward and said, "Listen, I have a weapons program which I'm going to confess to." Whether or not he actually did have that is another matter. But in exchange for confessing to that so-called program, he was brought in from the cold. He got some fantastic oil deals, and he also got a lot of arms deals and weapons deals that let him buy riot gear, for example, that he actually used during the Arab Spring, during the uprising. So this is a very interesting double-edged sword here that, you have on the one hand, the desire for change could have partially been sparked by the end of Saddam Hussein, but at the same time, other political players tried to take advantage of it.
But that Iraq War itself, do you think that there could have been a way to prevent it if there was no intervention from the West?
Well, I think the main problem with intervention from the West that we've seen in Iraq and in Libya, you have intervention, but you have no plan for what to do after the intervention. I suppose you could see the two as linked. So if I go back to my previous point, just as overthrowing a leader that was unelected in the Arab Spring does not get rid of structural problems, overthrowing a leader through outside intervention does not solve other issues either, because that leader is part of an entrenched system. And if you do not make sure that you have, should we say, some sort of successor in place or some sort of governance in place very quickly, you will have a power vacuum. And we saw this happening in Libya. We've seen it happening in Iraq. There's a lot of factionalism in Iraq. I recall I had a meeting, it was a couple of years ago, with a military attaché who was visiting Iraq, and he said that he met certain tribal leaders who said to him that, certain states pay for information for access to certain things in Iraq, okay? And one of the tribal leaders he met with said, look, I get paid X amount of money from government XYZ in the West.
Okay.
But if someone else comes along and they're willing to pay me more, I'm going to defect because I got to pay the people in my tribe as well. And you see, this is outstanding. You have this kind of factionalism which was suppressed by people like Saddam Hussein. It does not mean, of course, that dictatorship is good. It is not. But the problem is it's a system. And anything that is a system cannot be overthrown that easily. It can't, you see.
Yeah. And why do you think people suddenly felt confident enough to revolt against the president or the government?
Yes. Well, I think if we were to look at, again, the 2003 invasion and the end of Saddam, I think that sparked some confidence in the people, but I also feel that when we got to 2010, it was, in a sense, the domino effect was one part of it, that you see Ben Ali fall, and Mubarak as well, but also social media, because when we
I was going to
saw the
mention
rise
that,
of-
yeah. We didn't.
yeah, of course, absolutely. When you see the rise of Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, one of the things that social media gives us is quick connection, widespread news, fast news, but also anonymity.
Yeah.
And give a person a mask and they'll tell the truth. And some networks give you more anonymity than others, but this gave people the chance to criticize their governments and to even turn against them.
Yeah. Nikolai, now when you look back to these few years, starting, let's say, from the Iraq War up until the conflict in Syria started, how do you look at it? What do you think? Was that a good decision? Did that lead to more stability? Was it good for the people, for the region? What's your take on that?
I think if you were to look at the region and look at also some of the monarchies, the people inside are probably quite sad. I mean, I lived in Jordan for 4 years, and there are a lot of Iraqis who live in Jordan because of what happened to Saddam Hussein. Now, during my time in Jordan, I have personally seen portraits of Saddam Hussein hanging from shop windows in Jordan.
Wow.
That's very interesting because some of it is Iraqis who came into the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and some of them were wealthy, so they could set up shop. They didn't become refugees the way that, unfortunately, Syrians became refugees. They could set up businesses, they could get on with their life, but some of them have said that they wish that Saddam Hussein had not been overthrown because they can't go home. At the same time, you actually have Jordanians, if I can talk about the relations there, who also say the same thing because Jordan is a kingdom that's quite poor. There's no oil. They border Iraq. They've had to absorb refugees. And under Saddam Hussein, they got oil at an 80% discount, which they don't get anymore. And so you actually have some Arabs, at least here in Jordan, who say, well, we wish that Saddam Hussein had not been overthrown. At the same time, I would argue that to an extent, some of the Arab governments may have partially benefited from the chaos in Iraq. What I mean by that statement is that, for example, in Jordan, when there were protests going back to 2011, and you had a minority, a very small minority, saying, "Oh, down with the regime or down with the monarchy," it was actually the Iraqis who said to the Jordanians, "Don't do it. Look at what happened to Iraq after Saddam Hussein was overthrown. Don't make that mistake here." So, in other words, when you have the chaos in Iraq next door, you are able to point to it and say, well, look, this is what happens if we get rid of the system. And there are some actors, political actors at the top, who will take advantage of that too, and who actually would see what happened in Iraq as, of course, a human travesty, but they also see it as a political game to maintain the status quo.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nikolai Due-Gundersen with us on the line, International Relations, Middle East and North African Region Specialist. Thank you so much once again. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, bye.
0208 687 7878. Now this